Hi, Charles. Nice to meet
Adina,
Hey, Adina.
nice to see you, Adina. I mean, I could actually look around and see. I see Amit, I know. Nice to see you.
Charles.
There's M from Penn. Just congratulations, a 2020 nursing and BA in poetry, Kelly Writers House graduate without a graduation. Well, I guess you had some kind of graduation, but it's nice to see you. And she's been working with different, anyway, many classes with me. So I just wrote her a few minutes ago because she's interested also, I think, in the Jewish connection here. So this is live from Israel. So.
All right, and I think we're about ready to go. Joel and Wani, everything seemed fine? Great, so let's stop this. We have everyone now. I can see everyone's faces. Very, very cool. Welcome, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Good to see everybody. And I see someone else is waiting to get in. We'll let them in. So welcome, everybody. This is Mekuvan #2 with Charles Bernstein. This is another online Jerusalem session. We're exploring how to connect around our literary and cultural interests online. Thanks for joining me. Again, my name is Lonnie Monka, and today we have Charles Bernstein with us. Jerusalem, for those who don't know, is an ongoing initiative to foster literary culture in and around Jerusalem. We've been running lots of in-person events, and Mekuvan is the new way of exploring ways to connect online now, which is because of the pandemic, we all are forced to do that. Today we have Charles Bernstein, and last week we had a nice session with Erica Meitner, and we have 4 more sessions after this. For anyone's interested, let us know and we'll get you some more details. It's actually really nice to see Adina is one of the people here with us today. She's an upcoming session. Next week we have David Kaplan and also Alicia Ostreicher and Jake Marmer. So I'm really excited about everybody, and we hope you tune in. And
all friends of mine. You're a whole series. People who not only I like the work of, but I like the people very much. Yeah.
Sure. And you're a good person to be a friend of, I guess. So that's Charles, everybody just heard. For those, I guess I hope I posted a lot either through the emails and also through the Facebook page, some of his more official bio. And I really hope that people took a chance to look through that. I think in this format, I'll refer people to all the stuff written about him online if you want to check out more about Charles. I just want to take a second maybe to say personally for me, I had the opportunity to start looking into Charles's work very deeply when he came to visit a few years ago. And for me,
with Ari Reznikov, who's just joined us online. So
for sure, Ariel,
contact to meet you, and very much appreciated that. And he's being here, I think, probably from Berkeley. He's in Berkeley.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Ariel, great to have you here. So again, yeah, Ariel actually was the person who made the contact. I think he was here with Charles a few years ago.
Yes,
I think he was here with Charles a few years ago.
My absolute guide, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Everybody needs somebody to help them out here in Israel for sure. So yeah, with that, I mean, before then, I can just say personally that I had heard of Charles's names associated with language poetry, whatever that means for a lot of people, and I didn't really know much more than that. Since I knew he was coming, I started to read some of his work, and I was mostly just surprised by the depth and the breadth of, so there was just so much going on. It was hard to handle, and since then, I've continued to try and read his older books as well as follow the books that have come out since then, and just standing on one foot, I think that interacting with Charles's work has been an ongoing effort to kind of interact with what seems like a paradoxical complexity and simplicity. There's something he I think, finds simple ways of touching on very complex ideas. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Charles, but
when you said breadth and depth, I was disappointed you didn't mention the outstanding shallowness of much of mine. work. I've tried very hard to keep it shallow at certain points, like in a pool where you want to have the area just goes up to your ankles. You don't
Sure.
get to go into the deep end all the time. But the deep end, yes,
Well,
scares me.
there's no shallowness or the best is to be deceptively shallow, I guess.
Well, this is my dyslexia. Deceptively shallow and shallowly deceptive. Shallowly deceptive is what we share as a political culture in the United States and Israel. So you wanted me to speak about the Netanyahu trial? Is that why I'm here?
Well, we actually have another person setting up a live stream, a little screen, and letting people at the demonstration see if they have any questions for you.
All right. That was, I
No,
Israeli policy with you guys who were mostly there.
Sure.
Although I think as an American, I should really tell you what's going on in your own country, because I know much better reading the New York Times than you could possibly know living there. This is one of the great privileges of being American. We have this kind of knowledge. Just a joke, shallow joke.
Well,
See, Ari's laughing. The rest of you, I don't know. Perhaps it's not that funny.
So we're jumping into things, and maybe less your political commentary. And I definitely did warn you that I wanted to ask you about Israel and Jerusalem. And I think that as we're all finding ways to interact online, there's we find ourselves doing that because we're in isolation. So we have all these new phenomena and experiences that may allow us to reflect on what place and space, how they affect all of our lives, and especially here, I think thinking about how they could affect poetry is something that I want to explore. And then, for those who don't know, on the one hand, I imagine most people think of Israel, they start thinking of Judaism and your Jewish identity. But I also know that that has been explored in a lot of interviews, and you've talked about it in your poetry and essays. I was thinking maybe besides focusing on the religious aspect, what is just your relationship with Israel and Jerusalem?
I'm glad you're not focusing on the religious aspect. Well, I went to Israel for the first time, the place, just when I graduated from high school in 1968. Interesting time to go. Heard about it a lot growing up. I'm really very typical ethnically of New York, Ashkenazi Jew. My grandparents both born in the Pale of settlement in the Russian Empire, Poland. And I was bar mitzvahed in 1963. I went back to Israel after avoiding going for a long time with my wife, Susan B. So my association partly with Israel has a lot to do with her in that her parents, now I met Susan in 1968 when we were both teenagers, both in high school, and I met her parents then. So I go way back with that family. And her parents were both born in Berlin, but then went on a youth aliyah to Palestine and moved to the United States in 1947. But almost all of their relatives are still there. Almost all of Susan's relatives on both sides of her family are there. So when we first went with her and her sister, like, I don't know, dozens of people met us at the airport. So it was an interesting experience to meet them, very different than the people I met through Ari on this last trip. But so I do have that family connection, although it's Susan's family, but still most of my life, over 50 years with her. So that's part of it. So I don't know what else you want me to say apart from on this particular subject. Jewishness is a very interesting and engaging thing to talk about, but I'd rather do it than talk about it. I did edit a book, though, which, in response to this, didn't edit a book. I put on a series at the Center for Jewish History, Radical Jewish Poetry, Secular Jewish Practice, and that's where I would go first. Dina is involved with that book, too. And it's our attempt to to sort of deal with the legacies of Yiddishkeit culture and non-observant Jewish ethnic culture on radical poetry from Stein and Zukovsky and Charles Resnikov, onward to folks like Ted Greenwald and me. So that would be a place where we explored some of those issues.
So again, I think that did focus more on the Jewish identity, and I'm thinking, again, drawing you to this idea of place and space and how that might have affected your impressions and maybe even your poetics in a way. And for instance, when you were here for the last visit or any of the other visits, was there any kind of a more intense impression of any sort, especially when meeting people? And I know the last time you were here, you were doing readings, you were meeting a lot of poets.
Right. Well, I was invited by the university, Tel Aviv University, Roy Tarkovsky, who I like very much. I got to meet Reuven Sur, who was a great hero of mine, who's a linguist and writes about sort of a Jacobsonian, and he is involved with he's a radical prosodist and performance prosodist. So it was great to meet him. I guess.
I also know that you met
Harry.
I was about to say Harold Schimmel. You sat with him for a while, and you did 2-piece interview and reading.
Right. Well, we were going to say the same thing as I was talking over you. I think that would be the most important thing for me was to meet Schimmel, Harold Schimmel. That was an amazing experience. I know a lot of people who have a sort of a family resemblance to Schimmel in New York, who continued the life he might have lived if he hadn't gone to Palestine, well, actually to Israel, Palestine, when he did. So, and that was an amazing connection, and I was really so happy to meet him and to do that interview. And the museums, Susan and I are big museum people, so we love the art museum. Actually, one of the things that really affected Susan, because she did a lot of paintings, or at least a couple that were based on, were the Chagall. The Chagall collection there is really mind-blowing, much better than a lot of the Chagalls I've seen at other museums. Sometimes his work is less interesting and kind of thrilling than it is in the collection that's in the museum in Israel.
Oh, very cool. I saw that I think she was I forget if that show got disrupted. Wasn't there supposed to be, or there was recently a show of her Chagall inspired?
Right. Unfortunately, it was postponed. But she talks about in the interview the Chagall, one of the Chagall paintings that she writes about. Yeah. Hopefully, it'll come back. I don't really know how to. Your question is, maybe this is the best I can say about it. It's impossible not to think about aspects of my Jewishness in respect to Israel. For me as an American going there, it's just not. It's because it's so symbolically overlaid. So you say, well, something outside that, but I don't know that I have the ability to go beyond that. I do think that one of the things that I write about in a way in Shadow Time, my libretto about Walter Benjamin, and also that Radical Jewish Poetics book is the effect of the extermination of the European Jews, and my strong resistance to the idea that Jewish identity is in any way tied up with one mode of it, whether it be Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstruction, belief, non-belief, or certainly Israel versus Brooklyn. So I think that and I'm really committed to the history of non-observant or secular Yiddishkeit, anti-religious Jewish culture in the United States. So I think that the two diasporic communities in Israel and in the United States, but especially New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, have a distinct a distinctly different evolution
Mhm.
and have the potential to move further apart politically and socially, culturally, and that's understandable because the experiences are very different. I'm against any kind of hegemony of any conception of what identity is. I always like to say, based on an article, essay my friend Bob Perlman wrote that's in that same book, that the more somebody disclaims their Jewish identity, the more they dislike it, the more they are appalled to even be associated with it. These are the real Jews. So if I was to go for Jewish essence, that would be where I would start, and then the rest of us sort of come in somewhere further away from that non-essence.
Sure. When I heard you, or when I've read you talk about this issue, it reminds me of even in the Bible. The fighting with the angel is when
Yes,
it
well, of
becomes
course,
Israel.
you see my jokes, they all Jewish jokes, a lot of them that I'm recasting for you, and what can I do? There it is. But I think that that's in the United States, there's a lot of interest and concern in framing things through their identity. I have a lot of questions about what that means, and resistance to the way in which it sometimes can be manipulated, especially along right-wing lines of nationalism and separation. On the other hand, it becomes, it's part of who I am, for sure. Somebody once said to me, a good friend of mine who's very involved with my work, so when I wrote that, you didn't really have to explain that you were this. We always knew. I mean, I think certain markers are very obvious for people. So it's a kind of given.
Maybe, thinking again, for us, most of the people here are coming from Israel, and I guess just one last stab at the question is, I think it's interesting for us to hear you developing in New York what your relationship is to here. And maybe I'm thinking back to the Harold Schimmel interview you did, in which he told the anecdote about
The
how,
anecdote is good.
yeah,
We'll talk about that.
more anecdotes.
Yeah.
But he talked about how George Oppen and Charles Reznikov, for instance, it was very important for them to send their books to the National Library. And I think that they, in a way, were an earlier, but still in the same lineage as you, kind of New York radical secular Jew.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Oppen was very non-identified as a Jewish person and was a communist. Great poet. I mean, just fantastic. Charles Reznikov, the cousin of Ari, who's with us today, another favorite poet of mine, was a little bit older than Oppen, and Zukovsky would be the third of the Jewish objectivist nexus. Yeah, I mean, but Reznikov was very Jewish identified. So, and his wife worked for a Jewish organization. So there's a although he wasn't necessarily religious in a conventional way. So the two of them, though they liked each other very much, are very different. But I was going to talk about anecdote that in respect to you and I talking, Lonnie, in this group. I mean, I think I'm emphasizing difference because I always emphasize difference, and also I'm just afraid of American arrogance, including my own. But through that difference and recognizing that difference and not the priority of one versus the other, it could be that in forums like this around poetry and the context of poetry, we could have various kinds of connections, or through liminal figures like Benjamin, who after all, he is liminal. He dies right at the cusp of the war in Europe. So it's the end of a certain kind of European intellectual tradition. So, I mean, Walter Benjamin is as much a part of who I am as in every way as is, the Jewish American poets. So, but there's no, the future of that became so transformed as of 1940. So how we think about that and how we can reimagine what those connections might be. It's my impression, and I could be wrong, that in Israel, there is very little knowledge or interest outside of maybe a small group of people in what's important about American poetry, certainly, but certainly American Jewish poetry. So it's there's you can't there's the ground would have to be built if that was an interest, but that hasn't been there. On the other hand, you could say, well, the same for within American poetry and even among American Jewish poets, the knowledge of poetry written in Israel is limited, and for a number of reasons which you guys are familiar with. Good, but that's also the case, especially the people that Ari has been very written about so eloquently. Avat Yashram, who I had read years ago and was very interested in and learned a whole lot more, in the last several years through Ari. So this is a different kind of a take and different kind of possibility that could be described as diasporic or multilingual, or not grounded in any one place, U.S., Israel, Europe, and there I think that could be interesting. Of course, I would include Stein very importantly in that too, a very also non-identified Jewish poet, who's still one of the most radical figures within American poetry. But a lot of accounts of what Jewish culture is within the United States and certainly within Israel wouldn't include any of the people I'm talking about, but it would include the comedians who are very important to me. Also, Mel Brooks or Sid Caesar, I've written a lot about recently, or Groucho Marx, and many others. So that's another interesting tangent. Those comedians, Larry David, right now.
Sure. I mean, yeah, you're I guess really tying together your background with the people speaking. I was especially moved, you could say, by the by thinking of the relationship of Israeli poetics to American poetics, and I think a lot of people here are very influenced by American poetics, even the few, even some of the people that are native Israelis and English is a second language for them, and that they're you're right that it's not well known, but I do think that as you probably heard from Ariel and some people you met through him, that it is taken seriously and considered by a lot of some interesting people.
You see, to say something is obvious, but I was born 5 years after the end of the Second World War. So growing up in the 50s in New York, and I write about this in one of my first essays. I think that there's no easy way to talk about what I'm talking about because of the catastrophe, the khurban, the trauma, and how that divided up and without the possibility of coming back together in some way. But I mean, I'm enough of a Jewish mystic to say that the fragments are lit up and illuminated. You don't want them to come back together. I don't. They won't. I don't believe that they will in any case, but I'm not desiring those to come back together. I want to recognize the vessel as broken shards in which we can't put the puzzle together, but we can put it in relationship. So, but I think that the difficulty of this issue, I'm not blaming, I have no blame on this issue at all. On the contrary, stunned, but not blamed. I think that we're dealing with something, certainly for my generation, and I'm sure it must be different for you, but still I can't speak to that. That it's we're responding to something that is so enormous that for Jewish culture, that the idea that it doesn't all work out. Well, how could it possibly work out? It can't. It's the lack of working out which is the expression of what's happened and what's happening. And then there are many things to say about what's happening on both on both where you are and where I am. Mm-hmm. Elaborate on that, add to that issue. But I don't want to talk about that right now. Okay. So this is a reality that we're living in.
Let's maybe we'll go from mysticism back to some regular poetry. And I guess you are going to be presenting some of your poetry, and I just wanted to maybe before you do take a second to think about the poems you're going to present for us, something from your newest book, The Course, which was co-written with Ted Greenwald. And again, just thinking about space, maybe something interesting for me is to think what kind of shared space you guys were engaged with when you're writing this. So again, maybe some people don't know, but it was Ted was your friend. You passed away a few years ago, and you wrote via email.
So Ted is an interesting character. He died a few years ago. He's about 8 years older than me, so he'd be in his late 70s if he had lived. So he's in some ways has connections with Schimmel, in the same age, and in a way this related sensibility. And while he was confined to his apartment and to hospital because of a long emphysema illness, so he was in the conditions that many of us are in now, but much worse. We wrote this back and forth on email, every day or sometimes a couple of times a day. So the whole book is about 350 pages. It's a long book. We wrote it over the 1 year, stopping just a few days before he died. So what I'm going to do is to try to see if this works. I'm going to share my screen and go to this to this, I think we want. And let's see if this works. I made this just for this event. I'm going to read 2 poems from my collaboration with Ted Greenwald called The Course. The first one is called Sen Sen Cha Cha. Water sound jumps in mid-sandals, rippling under the hood as a slipcase rewards looking elsewise. Relaxed throat around sound, a word means just about nothing, as if on a stroll, so many as-ifs. Hold tongue, stranger's hand, word for, in a manner of, so who was insufficient unto? You ever sit down, say anything? In the edge world, curving behind, goddamn big gulch. Didn't say left elbow bend, goes around fellow feeling. Say what? I've got all the tin in the world. Could it clouds, easterly blues, last seen, indirigible? How do you spell that? Come on, come clean. Door as portal, postal, gum and go. A game with me, outrigger. Longing for longing, but banking on next stop will be the next one. Wait up, nice out, step up. Focus behind, feel what's where, what's when. Useless used to, name comes up, way when. Leaning on left, hurts enumerating, wisp of wish. Flesh out, curves in space, sounds how, about that, she, it, flying without trespass on my so-called lawn. A new word a day, a new day, word for word. Inebriate of sound, debauching dawn, in search of night. Monsoon ringtone, deliver weave levels, heel thighs danger range, athwart alack, beside the hay amidst such rubble, unrunging bell, beyond cloud you, funny Carter feel, absent any honor, fear gnawing at heart, then back again, swing line, same line, bread and without pause, butter up, emboss, as in it's all a toss. Count me out till the melody going on behind, getting off and on, note for note train, remains insoluble,
at the door of instinctual abhorrence is how treats unsigned be have queep offering stuff, 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 stuff. The second poem is called Come to Think of It, and it's a poem that's made of one word per line, kind of riffing off Ted Greenwald's great poem Common Sense, the full text of which is at his EPC page. So here's Come to Think of It. Spits out real fall, high clouds in which says spiky flutter curve, away this but time, early morning flight echoes, echoing echo, plot, about, time, insufficiency, grating paper plate, drone in my slow motion, out, in, on, then, by, as the big picture, only you're just doggone. Own it, sure, but hands, curds, ways, slake, sure, thunder, hidden, willing, fight, then dodge, which lift the lid on cracked baloney. Be up on ever, not that blink, voice, tire, ever in cloud, do, say, whomever pleased, was, slip, clip, sleeve, swept, forge, done, dough, see, dough, and away, you easy, how pretty, go, stay, simply sip, sofa, roof, back of mind, or for whom, where, snipers pay, in what way, say, lots gains, come on, heels, mope, steal, as, don't worry, only if, or, even see, arc, rave, down, dim, aisles, careful service, dimples, gump, up, shimmies, arrival, window, moon, only to recoil, rainy patter, heat, and then end, a breezy mix, under wandering sky, wake 70s, bleak murk, chirps, longing, high, in 60s sludge, makes music tonight, some remembered, chance, less balance, big eyes, warmer, glassy, almost still, of that time drifts in, edge, curl off, brick, anywhere, but up, days, in weeks, flap, like geese, ear, toot, roof, smoothly, sawing, prime, the swell, moan, where, swept, I, own, boat, unknown, till time can't show, the room. What do you think about repetition in poetry?
I gotta, hold on a second.
Over and over?
I think you should repeat the same line, not
I made a mistake.
the same words.
Let me go back.
I just think of it line by line. Otherwise, you end up with end rhymes of single.
I forgot what I had done.
What do you think about repetition in poetry? Do you think that one should repeat the same words over and over?
Sure, I think you should repeat the same line, not necessarily the same words. I think of it line by line. Otherwise, you end up with end rhymes of single words, and that's not quite as interesting. Although you can do that in a form like a sestina or whatever, but it's more interesting to repeat the line almost like a resonance further down in the poem. It's almost like having a chorus, raylets, as it were, Ray Charles and raylets. So you have almost like a backing group, which is yourself, which is an echo, which, since it echoes, it sort of automatically is a sublime document, something like that.
Okay. Sorry, I forgot I had added that whole section, but I wanted you to see Ted. So.
Cool. Thank you so much. And again, there was one question I especially wanted to hear you talk about, and again, in case it wasn't clear, I mean, we kind of think we were excited to play the video, and maybe again for people who don't realize that the poems you read were from that book, and you guys co-wrote that.
Right. So that's a collaboration that Greenwald and I wrote over 1 year, going back and forth, just line, a couple of lines, through a year, the last year of his life. Yeah.
And then I had one follow-up question for the reading, but in the meantime, also I just want to let people know that if you have questions, start either do the Zoom hand raising so we can see who you are. Or
Yeah, so your whole half-hour thing, Lonnie, you told me on the phone you like to keep it to half hour, but you didn't even have me do the recording until almost a half an hour. But
You're good.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, my general view in teaching, and a couple of you will know this, I always have the Fidel Castro idea that you should go 3 to 4 hours without a break, because the audience finally just sort of cracks at about 3 hours. They can't stand it anymore, and that's where you have the conversion experience. So I think Zoom, we can't really quite do that. You know, you also, Lonnie, asked me to. I gave you a copy of that book, or the PDF, and you said, "Well, it's so different than your work, where I sort of get the shtick, you might say, of each poem, or but these seem more open-ended, more less that way." And I wonder how it would go over, how it could be read. So I said, well, let me do it. Let me make this little video for you, and read them. So it was, you partly wanted me to push in a direction counter to the way you were seeing my work. So did it work for you? Could you see how what was going on in those poems?
Especially the second one had the emphasis got to the point where your whole body was giving an oomph to some of those words, which again, I never reading on my own, I wouldn't have gone there, and I wouldn't have imagined that.
Well, it's single word lines, you know, and that's a really important. Actually, I said Common Sense, which is the name of Ted's collected poems, but the poem where he uses the single word line is called Makes Sense. Well, somebody once said about my reading that way that it looked like davening, actually. It's interesting, the idea that words would come alive in hearing them chanted or intoned is one that I have. Now, where that comes from, we go back to the first part of the conversation or not, because performance exists in many different ways, but I think it is an aspect to the work that's very important, the hearing in the performance. That's why I was concerned, if I was going to do a performance of a poem, not simply to read it for you here in the Zoom environment. I don't mind talking, because I didn't think I could do the full justice to it, as if I could be a little bit further back and work on performing it as a video. So that's why I made the video, rather than, I could have read that same poem, but it to me wouldn't have been as nearly as good. I think the real big differences between a video like that and reading live on Zoom. I also like to read live in person, and I hope to see you all read in person immediately. As soon as I get on a plane, I'm going, and I'm going to be there in person. But I can't do that right now. I was concerned about the technical stuff, that it wouldn't break up, but it came out okay, right?
Yeah, the picture was a little hidden at first, but not hidden. Yeah, at first,
that was my fault. I lost it at first, but yes, yeah.
But otherwise, it was, that was great. And also, so you mentioned my question. I would still love to hear your thoughts about the question, in case it wasn't clear for people. I was saying, what you call a shtick, I think it's more than just a shtick. Sometimes it's a shtick, but a lot of
it was a self-deprecating remark.
What?
It was a self-deprecating remark about.
Yeah, but it was like it was a deceptively shallow self-deprecating remark, I think. So,
good.
Again, like for those who are familiar with your work, or those who are not, I think that often when you work at them, there's a sort of organizing principle, there's an idea, there's like a rhetorical goal. Whereas the poems, I think everyone just heard them, they seem to me more like, I even started using the language of like free play and jazz. It made me think of just kind of getting into it and really just letting things loose between two people, which was really amazing to see, or to see on the page and now hear you read. But also just thinking the whole background of how this was done through emails, I think adds to that. But do you, I don't know, maybe, yeah. What are your thoughts about?
I agree with you. And Ted would especially agree. The relation of jazz, the free association, that's very much true of the course. I think the course represents two people who spent their lifetime bouncing off. You know, the whole thing is you bounce off what the other person does, just the way I bounce off words in the world. And even as I'm trying to do, it's more difficult here in the Zoom environment, bouncing off the you know, what people are saying, the words they use. And that's, you don't have a pre-existing idea. Famous line from that is somebody asking Robert Creeley in a question period like this, was that a real poem or did you just make it up? And, you know, that idea of making it up, process, you go as you go along, and there's no necessary dominant theme or subject matter. And yet rhythm and, you know, there are definitely subject matters and themes. But it is, collaboration with Ted relates to some of my work and some of his work, but it's different than either of our work. And it would be hard to actually point to who did what either. I couldn't remember myself.
So there's a few people in the chat that are asking they want to ask questions, and
Sure.
I think I'm having trouble unmuting or not.
Absolutely.
We have a
Well, let me,
yeah.
yeah, I want to answer the first question
Mhm.
and just say I absolutely disagree. I'm outraged that you would even say that, and I think you really have to rethink what you think poetry is and what you think life is. So, but thank you for the question. That was also a joke, by the way.
Yeah.
I always like to answer before the first question.
Right. Well, those are the calmest outrage I've ever seen. So thank you for that. And Amit, save us from the outrage.
Oh, all right. I was writing a question,
Okay, sorry.
but I'll ask. I have. Hey, Charles.
Nice to see you.
You too. Nice to see you. I have two questions. You can answer either one.
All right. Well, let me just answer first. The answer to the first question is no. And the answer to the second question is I don't know. Go ahead.
Okay. So first one is, what do you mean by secular Jewish practice? That's one.
That's no is a good answer to that. But I mean, actually, if different friends of mine have complained, perhaps about the word secular, but it's the term we use here in the U.S. to mean non-observant. Poetic practice, yeah. So it's radical Jewish poetry, secular Jewish practice. So yeah, so that it's really, I mean, in a way, the Jewish aspect of the non-observant. The Jewish practice of being non-observant. It's a bit of a paradox.
But what is the practice? Or do
What
you
is secular Jewish practice?
Yeah,
as opposed to, well, it comes in contrast to radical Jewish poetry, as opposed to religious. So we would say, in the United States, a lot of people want to consider that if you're a Jewish poet, or you're to be thought of within the Jewish poetry terms, it should be somehow either have the subject matter of Jewish identity, or come out of religion, or be involved with Orthodox Reform, etc. practice. So, which, as I said in the beginning, I don't agree with. And of course, we don't say that about comedians. We don't say that of Groucho Marx. But I would say so it's really just, in a way, it's a language conundrum. If we say religious practice, can we also say secular practice? It's a Zen koan. I have to leave it to you to figure out what that. If we say religious practice, then we can also say non-observant practice. Otherwise, you could just say, I mean, ethnicity. I mean, that would be, I wouldn't like that, and I would never have called the book that, but I think you could argue that that's what that's about. What the tradition, it's not my, I mean, it's a huge cultural phenomenon. It's with millions of people and hundreds and thousands of artists producing work that fit into this rubric. So what you want to say that it is. It's once you identify it within the Jewish frame, you put that frame on something. What happens when you do that? Jew, non-Jew, Jew. Non. So this is like my I can't get it. The text. Where the people of the book, where amidst the text there that I have in my shirt. What does that mean? What would a Jewish practice be that was not identified with Jewish religion and perhaps even did not want to be identified with Jewish ethnicity or Jewish identity? It's what I would say is chosen. Actually, you quoted that line from me earlier in one of your posts. We are chosen, we're not choosing. So you say, I don't choose to be a Jew. I'd rather not. I just want to be like everybody else. And I don't want to choose to be, it doesn't matter. This is a lesson that people learned just before I was born, right? It really doesn't matter what you choose. So it's partly would be the practice of coping with the fact that you don't choose, you're chosen. How's that answer? I could give you I think I should give 8 or 9 answers to this question. That are contradictory.
Yeah.
That would be the only way
I get the idea.
Yeah. And we could each of us here, there's 26 people. Each of you could answer. And one of the most important answers would be no, I fundamentally reject that. There cannot be secular Jewish practice, that it's nonsensical. And that would certainly be a strong answer. I would tend to agree with that.
Thinking of that.
You had a second question too, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about your shirt.
My shirt. Well,
that's a work of yours, right?
Yes, Veil from the 70s. Yeah, I worked to make it just not. I was trying to get it because I'm really trying to be. This is so typical of me, the liberal. I want to be, mess up the screen so you can't see. But I did think that it would be somehow rude if I did it in such a way that you couldn't see my face at all. That somehow there was something about the protocol of this meeting that wanted. So I worked on it so that it would just be on my shirt. But if I could have worked harder, I would have the whole background be the text, and it would just be my head. And if I went back, my head would disappear in the text. And if I went forward, then you would see it. And that would be secular Jewish practice. Kind of coming in and out of the words. Sometimes the words overwhelm you. Have you ever found that? Sometimes the words just overpower you. They're like a law. They just take over. And there's nothing you can do. You just got to exceed. And then sometimes you push back against them. And sometimes you go beyond them. And then when you've gone beyond them, you look again and you realize, no, you're actually just fulfilling the commandments. So it's the text is very important. Inscription, writing, very important to me. Writing has been very important to me. And interpretation of writing.
So another question from the chat, Jacqueline.
I told you the answer to the second one was I don't know, and that is true. I was consistent with that. Yes. Now going on ahead, Lonnie.
Going on ahead? You sure? I don't know. So yeah, Jacqueline asked here, I have to scroll back up. Do you you can also look at it if you want to see, but it says, do you have a tried method of how you compose a poem? What inspires you, and why are you called a language poet?
I have an untried method. I'm inspired by not being inspired. And they call me a language poet. Well, I edited a magazine with Bruce Andrews. This is good. I could plug, like used to be when you're on a television show, you'd plug their new book. So I have plugged the course available at SPD. I edited a magazine called Language with equal signs in between the letters. And so the work and the thinking that I'm involved with others from the 70s came to be called that. That would be one possible answer to that. And that complete set of Language magazine is coming out as a book, a cloth-bound book from University of New Mexico Press, as a set of hundreds of pages of letters between Ron Sloman, Bruce Andrews, and me, also from the 70s, has also come out. And the language facsimile edition is coming out in a few weeks. So these two books that go back to the 70s, 80s period. So, you know, I'm not much one for labels, but I understand this has to do like being Jewish too. I mean, it's, you know, I'm as much, you know, there's certain labels that are perfectly right. And it's reasonable for other people to think of you that way, but you don't necessarily think of yourself that way, one way or another, even if you were the perpetrator of the label, as in this case. So I resist it and I embrace it. But I mean, partly I've been interested right from the time that we did language in the 70s to try to create a place, the forum, for non-conventional and non-conforming poetic practices. So there's practices again, practice, not theory. And so a lot of what the language rubric could mean is a place for eccentric, non-traditional, non-conformist, to many people illegible writing that resists the way in which lyric poetry has been misunderstood by the mainstream and put forward in the United States. So.
Cool. So we also have a few more questions, so we may get to 3 hours yet. Next up, Ruben wants to chime in.
Hi, thank you very much for the reading. I wanted to ask a little bit about the question of maybe the tension between your personal experience and which we've been talking a lot about in this session between you know, the Jewish contexts and maybe the
you know, normally I don't talk about being Jewish, you know, because this to me is, you know, it's
no, sure, but also the, you know, the context with the email exchange that led to the book, and on the other hand, the sense of either impersonality or mimicry of other voices, which comes across in certain type of poetry and sometimes in other poems. Whether you see that as being important in your writing.
Yeah, well, impersonality comes from Eliot, right? And so I kind of dislike that. I mean, Eliot, wonderful poet, but I dislike that concept. I think I'm a hyper personality rather than impersonality. But I hear what you're saying. But I'm making it almost a theological point. It's not impersonality. It's an explosion of personalities and multiple voices and mimicry. Mimicry is also something that interests me quite a lot in respect to the Jewish frame, because the most typical kind of Poundian, I've written about this in respect to Pound, but also in the Soviet Union as well, and in the United States, the idea that the Jews are appropriators, that they have no voice of their own, that they don't have their own language, that English, for example, is a language that have appropriated. And I have no possibility, by the way, of connecting to whatever my real language would be, which I suppose might be understood as being Hebrew, which I don't know. So actually that's an interesting difference in the choice of going to Hebrew within Israel, which is fascinating because it responds, I think, in a problematic way to this ultimate charge of anti-Semitism. But yeah, I extol that. I think that there is no given voice. It's always voices, and mimicry is, you know, it's like, don't you mimic me. My mother used to always say that. It's just like, don't you mimic me. But mimicry is often considered to be contemptuous. And I have to be honest with you, in my case, my mimicry is sometimes contemptuous, depending on who I'm mimicking. But there are aspects to American culture that I mimic all the time that I'm not entirely happy with. And other kinds of notions, supremacist notions, let's just say. So, but I think there's something outside of mimicry. That's what I would just disagree with. And that's where I would go back to Walter Benjamin, or as I say, Walter Benjamin, or Walter Benjamin, to kind of mix it up there, speaking of the mimicry. But because he has the wonderful early essays that the basis of language is mimicry, the language is such in the language of man and the doctrine of similarity. Both of those suggest that mimicry or echo. So that's one of my main terms lately has been echopoetics, ECHO, echopoetics. So one doesn't have a center, one has many kinds of echoes. And you could see that also as a midrashic practice. In fact, I do see it as a midrashic practice. If you imagine the Torah itself to be blank, you only have commentaries, echoes, mimicries. You have no original. The idea that there's an original is a projection, an illusion, which itself can be subject to commentary.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So,
Next, we'll get to the 3 hours. The questions keep coming. Iran typed something. I don't know if you want to read it, or if you want us to read it. You're unmuted, so go. Let it rip.
It was too long.
I didn't read the chats because I'm very involved in right now. I'm just being in the space of looking. So I have not read the chats. I much prefer to hear
Great.
you speak. Yeah.
So hi, Charles. It's
Hello.
great to have you here. And
My pleasure.
And I remember you responded to Amos Oz.
Yes, well, I mean, actually, I was almost going to mention that because this is exactly, I did respond to that again in the beginning of this conversation. That's right.
Yeah, so I was asking in the chat, suppose a new Kafka is growing up right now, and it doesn't matter whether it's in San Francisco or Ashdod, where would this Kafka go in order to bridge the gap between the two secular cultures and societies, the American and the Israeli?
Yeah, it's you know, I think that I much prefer the way you phrased the question to anything I would possibly say in response. I agree with, how about that? I agree with that question. Where is such an interesting question, but I think that we go into the multilingual, diasporic, overlaid, contradictory, paradoxical space between, betwixt and between, neither here nor there. And that's the possibility. It's in a kind of the veil of history, not the end of history, not the falling away of the veil, but the dance with the veil.
Perhaps it's the web, the World Wide Web.
Well, I mean, I'm an early person involved with poetry on the web. I mean, the technologies that we have, including writing, one wants to, you know, I'd rather let somebody else use it. You want to take, you know, seize them and use them for the best. But I think the web is one technology, as writing remains, and book publishing and live events and exchange. I wouldn't give priority to any particular technology. And I think that there are a lot of problems with any dominant technology, regardless of what it is, in terms of access and how the formats control things. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to do you know, a video rather than do the live Zoom, is not to allow the format of the Zoom technology to dominate, but to think about other ways that that we can play with and open up those spaces. But I don't think you can depart with them. I think you're always in dialogue with the dominant technologies, but you can never rely on them. In fact, I think it's always good to assume that they're out to get you.
The panopticon of Zoom.
They're out to strangle you, to take away. So you got to fight for air, fight for breath, fight for expression, fight for personality within them, rather than that they're going to convey something for you. They will not convey. They're like a viper. They'll take away the conveyance, but you can use them against themselves in a sense.
Thank you.
I was talking while I was muted. Thank you, Iran. And then next up in questions, we have Alicia here. I'm going to try to unmute your account.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks for coming. I think you had a question for Charles.
I did. Charles, back when language poetry came on the scene, the theories around it were rather consistently arguing that this form or these forms of eccentricity, of breaking up the the norms and rules of using the language were deeply political.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking here we are, partly in America, partly in Israel. There's a lot of politics going on right now. And I wonder, Charles, whether you feel that there is a political dimension to what you are doing and how you might talk about that.
I had to plug in, so that's very cool. I mean, you're saying the theories around it, really. I mean, you're talking to me. I think those are my well, I mean, not just me, but a number of us, but me too. Yeah, people criticize that, and they don't. I would say one answer I would give to you. I would stick by. You know, I'm not one of these. There's nothing that I wrote in Content Stream saying that period that I wouldn't agree with now. So I'm all for that. The politics of poetic form. I think that you have to. The content of politics changes, month to month. Obviously, the politics within the pandemic context is very different than before, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I would also just say politics as opposed to what? I mean, that expression, me and for some of my immediate comrades, comes out of the 60s, and our understanding of the idea of 68, say, the politics, your politics is the way you live was one that was popular when I was in college. So that contrasted the idea that politics was always macro politics, had to do with what your view was on health insurance versus single payer or socialized medicine. For example, by the way, for socialized medicine, I have a clear policy preference, but that isn't the only kind of politics. Your politics also has to do with whether you endeavor as best you can to share responsibility for taking care of your children. If you're a person like me and having a child, you almost never had any interaction with a child until I did. That would also be a politics of practice. So it really has to do with practice as opposed to policy, going back to that idea. And language has a politics. It doesn't replace macro politics, but it has its own politics. Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was trying to ask about how your uses of language connect with your ideas about political behavior or principles. When one disrupts grammar, is that also a way of disrupting capitalism?
No, well, this is
that was an argument I remember seeing a lot of.
I mean, I would, it's again, you could trace that to things that I wrote. People say, well, these people said that if you just, fragment language, that we're going to have a social revolution, and they were wrong because look, we have Trump or we have Netanyahu or so on. And this is like unrelated to the argument. The view is, and I would put it in terms of George Lakoff or Goffman too, just as a philosophical, that language, verbal language, conditions our perception. This would be almost like the weakest way I could say it, and that therefore, when you use different terms, you change your understanding of what the political issue is. So it isn't that we disrupt grammar, as Gertrude Stein says. I am a grammarian. I make grammar. I object to the idea that the prescriptive and the normative is correct. Those are simply dominant social connections with social conventions with people with a certain amount of power that impose them, like your accent. Is this a wrong accent? Do I correct it to speak like this? So now I am speaking right. No, these are social choices you make. So for me, sounding those choices and making language users, freeing language users from the idea that there's one kind of grammar or one kind of lyric poetry that's hegemonic, and that if you're not subscribing to it, you're fallen, you're disgraced, you're a heretic, you're outside of it, or you're illegible, or you're violating grammar. No, I don't think that's what grammar is. I think grammar is something that's invented by people, and that they conflict. So these are areas for thought. It's as if you said you thought that at making artwork that provoked thought about politics was the way to go with art, but look, our politics are still very bad, so you failed. I mean, that is not. I mean, I people say that quite a lot. But I don't even understand what that argument would be. I would, I don't have any conception of success. I don't think the poetry produces political success. It's really not about political success. It's about reflection and aesthetic space and pleasure. And it's also about my, adamant resistance to the fact that one way of speaking is better than another. If I say, no, I don't like that, I could speak this way. It's not because I think other people, I want to change anything. Unfortunately, I would like to change things. I don't know that that's an effective way to change. None of the people that I was involved with ever thought that poetry was an effective means of political organizing to change the structure of the state of elections. And I'm only hoping that in the US that people vote. I mean, I've been reduced to that after all these years. Vote against the terrible destruction of thought, belief in science, the Enlightenment, care for anybody other than the super rich, destruction of the global environment, the pervasiveness of mendacity and deception. I'm hoping that, the majority of people in the right states will vote against that. And that's a modest wish, but yet we're reduced to desperately hoping for it. It is possible. So I've never been against voting. I mean, it's just they're not the same thing. Voting is not in political discourse. What's necessary in political discourse is never the same as what a poem would be. I think the problem is to try to think that poetry should be like macro political discourse. And you could write great poems about policy. It's possible. I like some poems like that, but I don't really think that that's what I'm interested in as a poet. It doesn't exist at that level. It exists at a micro rather than a macro level. And that also is politics, but politics is also at the micro level. And I think thinking about the kinds of approaches to what language is and the different conflicts of the way people use language is political. Yes, I do still think it's political. I don't take it back. I have an essay or a poem that's in, I guess his last poem, Attack of the Difficult Poems, called Recantorium, in which I denounce and recant all of these views of mine. So that's a good one to read. Maybe that was at my greatest moment of lucidity.
So I'm guessing from the silence, the question was mostly satisfactorily addressed for you. Thank you, thumbs up. And we had a few more. I know we're almost going to hit the 3-hour mark, but a few more questions if you're up for it.
I don't mind. Yeah, I mean, as I said to you, I prefer the smaller the group, the better. So
yeah, I
if
think
you want to talk, I'm here, happy to talk. I'm not having any.
I might be discussing some sort of inverse proportionality of the smaller the group, the better questions and more intense.
Well, I'm just saying I'm happy for an intimate discussion just with you or whoever wants to be here in the post-game show, as it were. So that's fine with me.
So one person wrote in the chat was Lisa. I just unmuted you, Lisa. Would you like to ask your question yourself?
Oh, sure, I can. It's a very short question. First of all, thank you, Charles, for this. And the question that I asked was, how do you separate poetic practice from theory? And I mean this at the level of, well, however you want to answer it.
Well, I've actually written about this several different times. I strangely, I think for most people it sounds strange, I'm anti-theory. I'm not interested in theory. I got a theory about how to repair this hole in the wall. I prefer practice actually be, doing it rather than speculating on how it could be done. I think a lot of the idea of theory that's emerged in literary studies has, been just thinking about things philosophically, which of course I am interested in. But practice is doing. The book that I did with Ted Greenwald is an example. It's all practice. There's nothing outside of it. It's informed by reading various, kinds of things and thinking how language works and what works. But the proof is in the pudding, in the practice, in the doing. So it's a little bit like the John Dewey art as process. I still remain, or the jazz example of improvisation. I remain very committed to the doing rather than to the hyper transcendental explanation. And I'm against, as a theory, the idea of theory or overall theory, something that can encompass everything in a consistent way. I think that practice allows for inconsistency. I very much come in this way out of Emerson and via Stanley Cavell, a very important person in my life who I met when I was in college, and his writing about Emerson and putting forward whim and inconsistency over and against theory. That's a relatively short answer to that question, which could itself give rise to a 3-hour answer.
Keep speaking when it's muted. I'm guessing again the silence from Lisa means that I think the answer was satisfactory one way or another. I don't know if Joelle wanted to ask anything. I had so many more questions. Maybe I'll ask one more, and we'll see if anyone else wants to also chime in. But I guess still I'm on this whole space kick. And maybe I like to think of this, there's like physical proximity and there's digital space, which I think we're all starting to explore in a new way now, like the Zoom, these Zoom meetings, including this one is one of them. And it's funny to me, on the one hand, you suggested that, with the choice to record your poems, something about Zoom does not lend itself to a reading. But on the other hand, you chose to read from a book where, again, using emails for composition, the digital realm became it was a vital factor of the exchange and the composition of, it was a vital part of the process. I guess if you have more thoughts about that, I'd love to hear. But also, do you I don't know, maybe do you see an opening with the new these new digital formats for creativity and maybe kind of improvising a Zoom poem, something along those lines?
I've been very involved with new technologies. With the Electronic Poetry Center was the first large space for using the web to archive, and the Poetics List, which was one of the early giant space of conversation, pen sound, audio, and I'm fully committed to poets involved with using digital means to create poems or video. All of that's fine with me. I don't know about Zoom in particular. Zoom is not so much a format. But I'm sure, to some degree, insofar as one's locked into it, a lot of people are teaching with Zoom, so it becomes a bureaucratic or industrial tool as well. It probably is worth thinking about, but I'm not spending that much time on Zoom, so I don't know about that. But yes, certainly interesting to try different things. My point about doing the videos is in the conversation, we have to have this in real time. It's quite interesting to me that a lot of the people here are far away, so that we're speaking at the same time. That has to be live, like a phone call. I love the phone, or a live event. But my reading a poem, I didn't have to do that right there. I could take time and do it and present it. I'm not interested in somebody signing up at a particular time to hear me read a poem, whereas you could go to Pen Sound and hear, dozens of hours of mine and many other people's readings, on demand. So to me, it's a fundamentally different thing. What works live? And I don't think reading a poem live on Zoom is something that is the best use of the live space. I think this, what we're doing, is for me the best use of the live space. However, I'm happy to, to read and have my work presented. I read all the time. And it was, you asked about the course, I was happy to make that recording. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
definitely address the question. But I guess I don't know. Maybe it's just my take on the situation is that you're aversion to, again, maybe Zoom isn't the right word, because Zoom, like
I'm averse to the idea of presence and liveness. I think again, I'm taking away conversation. You don't really, let me oh, this would be the best way to do it. You don't really need to see me. I think the idea that you're seeing me live, I don't like. That's true. I prefer just the audio. I prefer you just hearing. I made the concession in this case because I had an appreciation for what you're trying to do, and many people are doing. But I actually prefer audio to video unless I can control the video to a greater extent, like through making a video. And I think just hearing the voice allows for a greater sense of imagination. I also think that the Zoom conference creates an illusory or false sense of presence, and it often makes me feel more distant. It's not the same as sitting with you when you came to visit me in this very house. It's not the same as even if you called on the phone. It's and the idea that somehow we're going to be present to one another, and this is somehow a substitute for because after all, I mean, I'm calling you from Brooklyn after all. I'm writing to you from Brooklyn, which has been a very catastrophic situation here. And I think this idea of we're going to Zoom together, I mean, it's okay. Anything works if it's fine. I'm not judgmental about how it can work for different people, but I find it alienating. I find that Zoom, rather than creating connection, creates alienation through the specific technology, the way the video breaks up, the flow of the images, the false sense, as I say, of presence. And I prefer audio. I prefer reading, for example, a text, because I think that there's greater interaction with that. I think the idea that things have to be new, we have to hear what somebody's doing right now. Again, I'm accepting conversation, which I think has to be in the present like this. But I think otherwise, the idea that we're not dealing with the archive of recording or reading, that we need to have, some way of people, especially not what you're doing, but especially everybody has to be there at a particular time, and then they're all muted, but we can look at them, which I also don't like, having to look at the people looking, and it's just one way. It's just one way. It's just the person communicating outward. I do it on demand. I don't watch I use a DVR. I don't need to watch something that's just a broadcast at a particular time, looking at the other people looking. I don't see the value of that unnecessarily. So it's to some degree a phobia, and it's a response to feeling a greater level of alienation and talking about it. It's also, as you say, an aversion, because my whole work is filled with aversions. I'm actually quite an eccentric person. Let me do something a little bit more fun here. Yeah, how you can sort of, this is more.
Yes.
A bit better.
Again, I think this is something new that we're all starting to explore a lot. I think a lot of what you said is right, but as much as you're right, there's different layers of the way people see what's going on.
That's the Brooklyn Bridge now back to me, which is not far from where I am. Wonderful place. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm starting to explore. I'm an old person. I'm 70. I've been thinking about exploring these things my whole life, including media. So I'm not, I have thought about the web. I spent the last 25 years working on websites. So it's just how we use it. And I think a lot of people somehow, when we first started to do the EPC or hard to publish, things online, I go to like creative writing groups. They said, well, nobody will take seriously if you publish your work in an online journal, in an online magazine. This is what people said with, supposedly poetry experts. And you just, simply crazy. I mean, of course, that's going to be more important than print. So I'm really interested in the history of technology and how it changes. I just think that people have different ways that they use it. Some people will use the technology as a means of conveying or producing the work that they do, which I'm all totally fine with, in a neutral way. Others, like me, are averse to anything. We always try to, reflect on the medium itself and think about how the medium itself is part of the work. So
one thing I talked to you about, which is a big interest for me, is David Antin, which is especially I keep thinking of him relative to this work. And maybe another way of asking the question is less what you think yourself. Maybe what do you think his response would have been to these online Zoom-like meetings? Would he have embraced this for a talk poem? Could he have, with what you said about presence?
That's a really interesting question, and it certainly wouldn't want to speak for David, but I think you're right to think that he was interested in making the live event of the talk the primary forum, not reading, not something that was primarily pre-digested, and not reading something that you've already written and then reading that in a live environment. So I think he would be I think he would be like me, trying to think about how to use that specific medium. But for him, being present with the other people in an actual space, the space of the theater, even though they didn't talk, was crucial. What I'm saying is that this idea that you can see the gallery view, which I'm, by the way, not looking at, of everybody, it isn't like being, talking to an audience, because it's the amount of visual information I get looking at these pixelated images is not remotely, it's in no way like actually seeing somebody in an audience. It's not the same. And the idea that you think that it was the same is, to me, the problem. It is what it is. I know people have their screenshots, they have their names, or you see a little bit of them, but it has nothing to do with what the presence of another person in an actual live event would be. So, and I think that one has to find ways to deal with the, the environment that we're in now, as best we can.
So what? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Joelle. Go ahead, speak.
Yeah. So I've arrived. So what are those methods, right? If this isn't presence, what is it? You also mentioned liveness and presence, and I'm curious how those things are distinct, and yeah, if they are distinct, if you think they are at all. And it's interesting, you keep shape-shifting as this conversation happens, which is...
Yeah, I don't know. I think the issue of presence, which is, after all, is always vexed, that one wants to have some space of reflection. So, as I said earlier, presence is a little bit like when I was talking about the Midrashic with a blank center. Presence is like the blank center. There are many different overlays that you can have to it, and that's art, that's commentary, that's interpretation. But there is no essence. That's blank. And presence is often, a very problematic demand. Be present to me, like in a classroom or something. At the same time, the presence of other people in exchange is fundamental. But it's how you can get at that. I would say, like Dickinson, tell it slant. To try to do it in a more oblique way. I love this painting of Susan that's behind me. This painting, which actually, I'm actually looking at the actual painting, interestingly, in my, in fact, maybe I'll do something else for a moment. It is from, it's a painting of Susan that's the cover of my book. Here's something awful. So here's me, right? There's no it's the naked truth, you might say. But I mean, here's the painting. I'm in the room where I'm actually looking at that painting. So it's funny to see you can see the painting behind me? That's the actual painting.
Nice.
I love, I used it for near miss because the near miss itself is about this subject, near miss, nearness. And my essay on Reznikov is also called Reznikov's Nearness. So the question is really being adjacent to something without overwhelming it or dominating it. And, presence also has a very important spiritual and religious quality too. So I would be for a decentered, permeated sense that one is immersed in it, but it's not, it's not affected onto a specific icon of the, and it's that resistance to the icon or the fetish of the icon that is very, is part of what my answer would be. So telling it slant, obliqueness, opacity, ways of creating some angle, some obliqueness so that one can enter into. I like the French bread very much. That is great. French bread. This is what I'm thinking. Just, you're at a particular, I can't remember what your, Aaron is in a particularly, it looks like an office. It must be an office because there's a whiteboard and so on. It has that particular empty quality. So this to me is what I'm talking about. It's not you, but I mean, this is the empty space that I think we have to overcome in these contexts. And I think the bread does a good job. It's a simple thing. It's obviously not, spontaneous, but it's funny, it's lively. It breaks up the emptiness. And in fact, physically, it breaks up the kind of phony 3D effect that, that we would have. So.
I think you did another question, or had a question if she wants to ask it now.
Yeah.
I
I just want to stand on my head for a little while.
Go for it.
Get a little exercise.
While she's unmuting, I mean, another big interest of mine is the ekphrastic poetry and the many meanings of whatever that can be. And I don't know if you have thoughts about this, but one of the funny things for me is before this, I would go to galleries and do a lot of writing, in the presence of the works. And now that you can't do that, I see a lot of people trying to do a lot of writing just based off their screens, archives online, which is nice. But I think at the same time, I have this inkling of, I feel and think that there's something different and wrong about it, but I have trouble articulating it. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or if you've done any writing about visual, about art or other visual content online.
Right. Well, I mean, I live with a painter, right? So it's, I'm thinking about, that's why I actually tried to show you this. I'm actually trying to put the electricity which fell out. One of the things is when I walked around, I got unplugged. I also unplugged the microphone. I much prefer to use the microphone because the sound quality is better. So I'm going to go back to that. Yeah, I don't think that, I mean, I think reproduction, in Near Miss, there are a number of paintings in which I write poems in relationship to those paintings. So I'm all for that.
Maybe another way to ask the question is that in the book.
Paintings, yeah, of course, original paintings are very different medium. And there's no substitute. I mean, original paintings are like flesh. There's no substitute for the flesh. And as much as we're deprived of human beings, being deprived of seeing original art is profound problem of the present, can't be overcome. Without electricity, this stuff doesn't work at all. But like the sound, I mean, it's a little bit of reproduction, a little like the sound. Now I'm back on the microphone. I mean, those of you who have, are listening can hear the difference in the sound. It's just a much better sound. The tinniness, that does make a difference, as does the quality of reproduction. The resonance is very important. I went to Coney Island a couple of days ago, which is actually one of the most high infected areas, a little bit scary. See a jogger coming at you without a mask, breathing heavily, but but it was great. It's just great to be at the beach, like a regular place, and people getting hot dogs at Nathan's. That's like a real work of art. I mean, looking at a reproduction is, you know, I mean, that obviously film and so on is great stuff like that, but I feel very much the loss of that world, which is the world that I spent my life in. But that's one of the great things about books and about poetry. You know, you read whatever it is that you're reading the original. The person who's translating something of mine into Bengali wrote me yesterday, I had as a joke in my last essay in Pitch of Poetry, the patriarchal essay, I just said facsimile, as if that section of the poem was a facsimile. She said, what did I mean? I said, it was a joke, because really, it can't be a facsimile of an essay. It is what it is. It's an alphabetic writing, doesn't allow for facsimiles. So I sort of love that idea that you can't have facsimiles. When you're reading it, you're reading it. Differently, it's printed. There are different physical editions and so on. So.
Oh, I'm speaking with the mute. Yeah, I feel like we cut off you, D2, who finally muted.
I like that though, in a way. Then all of a sudden I lunged into the screen. I was listening there. Voice.
You keep walking off too. It's like, I'm glad you told us that that's for connecting your computer. Otherwise, it looks like a kind of statement, you know, especially.
No. I had to, now I'm back. I wanted to show the painting because I was looking at that painting, and then the electricity, all kinds of things happen. You don't even want to know what happened to me then. It's all fixed now. And now I'm without filter. You're just see, this is the real me. No text in my shirt or anything like that. You're seeing the real me. See, as I get really close, you see right now, you almost can like, this is it. This is me.
I was expecting the photo in the Wikipedia from 1986.
Yeah, well, we have that problem, yeah. I don't control that Wikipedia photo, actually. I can, when people ask me now, I would give present photos. But
I think you actually answered my question without seeing it. I was especially interested how living with a painter has affected you as a word artist, living with a visual artist.
Well, here's a very good, and perhaps on a practical level, worth sharing with you, since we're here, intimate group now. Ari is still here. I thought he would have disappeared by now. I'm going to talk to him later. He's just come onto my screen. Because I'm here without a hat, the reason, see, Ari has a hat, but he often wears a hat, because my hair did not look good 3 or 4 days ago. And Susan actually cut my hair, and she did a fantastic job. So she would not let me cut her hair quite rightly. So it's one of those practical problems we have in a couple of months. Oh, you know, we met in, really, she was 16 and I was 17 when we met. And her parents that I mentioned, since we're Israel connected, I want to mention their names, Sigmund Laufer and Miriam Laufer. Miriam Laufer went to the Bezalel Art School. This is a well-known art school. And they're both, Susan's mother is a fantastic artist, Laufer, Miriam. We have a website for her. You know, my parents were not, my mother was very aesthetic, involved with fashion. My father was a businessman in the dress business, schmata trade. So there was no real, it was just opening up a whole world when I met Susan and her parents too, of art and thinking about art. So that's been transformative. But so much of we've done in conversation over the years, and the book covers are really great. So that book cover of Near Miss of the, from the Bresson of the he's behind bars, and there's a bar that separates them. She's holding the bar, but that yeah, that's right. Thanks. Yeah, there it is. There's a nice reproduction, and I'm actually looking at the original painting because it's right here in our living room. This is really to me, this is the question of nearness. You know, to be separated. Also, those bars also could be like the bars of a confessional, I think, or the grid of language, maybe. But the nearness is palpable. So that painting just always seemed to me had to be the cover of the book. So when we go back that way, a lot of her paintings have framed my books.
Cool. So we have a general consensus of silence. We haven't even gotten close to 3 hours yet.
Right. Well, actually, closer than you said, because I spoke to you 2 days ago. You said the last one had gone to 36 minutes, but we should keep it below 30. So, and it is now an hour and 36 minutes.
I was inspired by your shallowness, I guess, to just go all the way.
But you see the depth without the face. You see how deep the back is with my bookshelves? You see, there's depth. By the way, I was told, and this I think is very important, if you want to seem important, significant, you do your Zoom stuff with bookshelves. But you notice a lot of people with the bookshelves, the actors, the singers, they have like 3 or 4 books, and then they have tchotchkes on it. They're empty. My bookshelves are full with thousands of books. So I got a good scenic background. So that just I'm a serious person. Except for this moment I'm speaking to you, I'm studying, reading books, poring over them, trying to understand.
What are you reading these days?
I am reading different manuscripts that people have sent to me, and that I'm commenting on for one reason or another. And I'm also I've stopped because I'm so busy doing all this other reading, but I moved 91 boxes of books from my office at Penn here. And a lot of those, you can't really see them here right now, but a lot of them, so I'm going through those boxes as well as a lot of unread books. So I'm trying to go through hundreds of books that I haven't read to decide if I'm going to keep them, and all the books to see if I'm going to keep them by looking them over. So a lot of my time has been spent just reviewing my books and reading through them, which has been great. I've enjoyed it very much. A lot of stuff that I missed and never got a chance to read. And, I want to look at every single book before I put it on the shelf. So it's a lot because I got really thousands of books. It's an insane number of books.
Are you a rereader? Like, do you enjoy rereading books that you've already read?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question when you decide what you're going to keep. One of the questions that people face is that I have a limited amount of space because we want to keep some space for the paintings, some free walls. But it isn't just a question of things I might reread. It's also a question of things that I, for some reason, want to have the object. Yeah, I mean, I reread poetry quite a lot. A lot of my favorite books of poetry I would reread. And when I was teaching, of course, I'd reread a whole range of things that way. More interesting to think about in terms of film, because I'm home watching films now, and there are a lot of, I watch mostly old films, and we often say, well, we saw that, but we saw it 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to see it again. But when I see it again, it's great. I always enjoy seeing it again. So I would say the answer is it depends. I read Minaloy over and over again. I've read The Love Songs. You know that Ari has written about Minaloy?
No, I didn't know that.
Ari, this person is actually I don't know if he's hearing us right this second. But
yeah, me neither.
She's writing an MA or something on Minaloy. Ari has written an interesting thing about a Yiddish connection with Minaloy, completely unexpected.
That's really cool. Well, her dad was Jewish, I think.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
Yeah,
so
cool.
It's
Actually,
in the context of writing about Yasharun and also Schimmel. There's also a chapter on Minaloy in his book, so it's very unexpected, but it's fascinating because she connected up to some of the Yiddishkeit poets that I was talking about with respect to Yiddish.
Wild. She was everywhere.
Jewish secular culture.
Cool.
See, Ari, when he's called on like that, it's like hailed like an Althusser. Then he feels.
I actually was successful.
Online. He puts his picture on, whereas now it's like Miles Davis. I'm going to let him talk, and I'm going to go off.
Ooh.
Now we have 2 pictures of Charles on the gallery.
Why 2? I don't even know why that would be.
Oh, if you go into gallery view, someone made that 1986 photo their background.
I have to go to the gallery view. Oh, That's a, yeah, I see why that person mentioned that picture. But see, this 14, this is now could be like one of those Zoom cocktail parties. And this is a group where people can talk among themselves without having questions and so on. That seems appealing to me because I miss that, really, honestly. Really been just going nuts, as we all have. At least, I don't know, all is a bit. I think we have taken the staying at home very seriously, like more our age and the circumstance in Brooklyn. So very rare to have conversations with multiple people. I do like that. But perhaps it is time to say farewell.
Alas.
With that.
And it was a pleasure to talk to all of you. And I, Adina, you wrote me a private message. I didn't totally understand. Let's do it on email. You wanted a copy of the Greenwald thing I made? Anyway,
yes, I would love that to play in my class.
Actually, before we go, let me just go and see the beginning that you missed. I'm just going to end with just the beginning because I messed it up, and I want you to see it from the beginning. And I'll turn it off in a second.
I'm going to read 2 poems from my collaboration with Ted Greenwald called The Course. The first one is called Sen Sen Cha Cha. Water sound jumps in mid-sandals, rippling under the hood as a slipcase rewards looking elsewise. Relaxed throat around sound, a word means just about nothing, as if on a stroll, so many as-ifs. Hold tongue, stranger's hand, word for, in a manner of, so who was insufficient unto? You ever sit down, say anything? In the edge world, curving behind goddamn big gulch, didn't say left elbow bend, goes around fellow feeling? Say what? I've got all the tin in the world. Could it clouds? Easterly blues, last seen, indirigible. How do you spell that? Come on, come clean. Door as portal, postal, gum and go. A game with me, outrigger. Longing for longing.
Awesome.
That's a good way to end, longing for longing. So that's the little bit of the bit you didn't see. And it is interesting when you just hear it, you were saying the gestures and so on. I mean, the video is an interesting dimension of seeing the reading, different than the auditory. But I'm happy to end just with that little bit that that you didn't see so well. And I will see you all anon.
Well, thank you so much, Charles. And thanks, not only to Charles, I mean, I think at the end it was amazing that everybody talking. And thank you to everyone for coming out and for participating. And we have Adina here in a few weeks. You should come back for her session. We're going to do an online session with her as well.
Yay, Adina.
Yeah.
Hey.
Michael Dickel. See, that's nice. I like that background.
Yeah.
It's something, I don't know. It's just
my own art.
Yeah. Oh, it's your own art, because I was going to say beautiful.
Thanks
Yeah, it's a beautiful
Thanks
image.
for teaching me this trick, though. I didn't know this
I see. That's the trick.
doing.
That's right. Yeah. But if you're an artist, you can play with it a little bit to figure out what you want. I like the background like that. I think that really looks beautiful because you really like you're in the art. That's what I like about seeing you that way. It's also a really good image for it because of the combination of the spatial and the swirl and then you're right in the middle of it. So
gorgeous.
There's actually and there's shadows in there too.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah. All right. Well, next.
Good to see you, Charles.
See you all anon.
Thank you.
Charles, thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.